I speak to you
As
today
I stand before you
with
today,
feelings of profound sorrow.
I cannot help but feel the weight
Throughout her life,
The palace
King
wasn't
Charles
supposed to see this letter.
discovered something
It
that
wasn't
changed
meant for him.
everything
Stared at the
between him
page
and Camilla
and
after
quietly
Prince
broke
William
down.
handed him a report filled
The
with
words
shocking
inside didn't
details
attack
about the
him.
Queen
They
Consort's
exposed a
activities.
decision that could
The
collapse Queen
document
Camilla's
revealed
position
troubling
overnight.
behavior that had been
This
going
letter
on
didn't
right under
argue.
the king's
It
nose for
proved,
months.
and the timing
Charles
was no
read
accident.
through the pages,
Someone waited
unable
years
to come
for
to
this
terms
moment.
with it.
The question is
But
simple.
within days,
Who
the
sent
warmth
it?
between the king and his
And
wife
why
freezed.
now?
By the
Stay
time Camilla
tuned
tried to
as
understand
we
what
uncover
went
the
wrong,
details
it
behind
was
this
already
letter.
too late.
The night
What
the
did
palace
William
fell
uncover
silent.
that destroyed the
A letter sealed, handwritten, and left quietly on the king's desk. No royal stamp, no official courier, just one name on the front: Father. What began as an ordinary morning unraveled within minutes as Charles opened a message from his son, William, that would leave him shaking, breathless, and utterly changed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The morning had begun in familiar silence, the kind of silence only palaces know. Wide halls breathing history, curtains drawn just enough to let pale winter light spill across polished floors. King Charles sat alone, reviewing routine correspondence, his mind drifting between duty and fatigue, between crown and conscience. Nothing about this hour suggested destiny was waiting on his desk, until he noticed it. Not among official dispatches, not bound by protocol, a single envelope placed carefully atop the stack. No crest, no seal, only handwriting unmistakable, intimate, painfully familiar. Williams. For a moment, Charles did not reach for it. There are letters that announce ceremony, letters that carry state secrets, letters that change nations. And then there are letters that change fathers. This one did not belong to the crown. It belonged to blood. Months had passed without true conversation between them. Conversations reduced to formal greetings, controlled smiles, carefully worded statements filtered through aides and advisors. The distance had not come suddenly. It had crept in quietly, year by year, after coronations, controversies, choices never fully discussed, and emotions never fully resolved. A father and a son standing side by side before the world, yet separated by something heavier than duty. Charles lifted the envelope, feeling its weight before opening it. Not physical weight, emotional, final, the kind that suggests nothing written inside can be taken back. Once read, his fingers hesitated at the edge, betraying a fear he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge, because deep down he already knew. This was not a letter of comfort. It was not a letter of celebration. It was not even a letter of reconciliation. It was a letter written by a man who had reached the end of silence. As the paper unfolded, time seemed to slow. The first line alone forced Charles to inhale sharply, as if the air itself had suddenly vanished from the room. The words were not cruel. That would have been easier. They were honest, and honesty in this family had always been the most dangerous force of all. Memories rushed in before he could stop them. William as a boy, standing rigid beside a grieving father. William as a young man, carrying expectations heavier than any crown. William learning slowly, painfully, what it meant to be royal and what it cost to be human. Each sentence tightened around Charles's chest, not accusations, confessions, regrets spoken aloud at last. Questions that had waited decades for answers. He paused after the first page, hands trembling now, eyes burning in ways they had not burned in years. Something inside him recognized the tone immediately. This was not a son asking for guidance. This was a future king warning the present one that time was running out. Outside, the palace remained still, guards unmoving, clocks ticking with merciless precision. The world unaware that inside one quiet room, a monarchy had begun to fracture, not through scandal, not through politics, but through a single letter, finally daring to speak the truth. And as Charles forced himself to continue reading, one question rose louder than all the others, echoing through the silence like a drumbeat of fate. But what did William write that shattered the monarch's composure, and what truth had finally been unleashed after years of silence? The letter was not an attack, it was worse. It was honest, brutally so. William's words weren't seeking revenge, they were seeking release. Every paragraph peeled away layers of resentment, expectation, and pain that had long been buried beneath royal protocol. There was no royal pretense in William's tone. He did not write as the Prince of Wales. He wrote as a son, a man, a boy still carrying the weight of decades-old questions that never found answers. The letter began softly, disarmingly so, with gratitude. Gratitude for the role Charles had played during his youth, for moments of effort, for trying to hold the family together after Diana's death. But even in that warmth, the pain was present, like a shadow trailing every word. William confessed confusion. He spoke of a childhood spent navigating cold formality masked as structure. He questioned why certain emotions were discouraged, why vulnerability had to be buried. He recalled nights where his silence was mistaken for strength, and feelings left unspoken were treated as duty fulfilled. There had been no room to grieve properly, no space to cry freely. The walls around them were too high, built not from stone, but from expectation. Then came the turning point. William. William admitted he had revisited her tapes, her letters, her voice echoing from the past, more alive than ever in the present. He had done so not to idolize her, but to understand her, and to understand what she had seen in Charles that perhaps he had missed. He did not hold back. He wrote of how her absence carved a hole that no tradition could fill, of how the family's refusal to speak her name had made her memory louder in his mind. He blamed no one explicitly, but the implication was clear. Silence had been the enemy. And then William shifted from son to heir. He questioned not just Charles's past as a father, but his present as a king. Decisions made, voices ignored, the weight of ceremonial gestures masking deeper fractures. He wrote, "You wear the crown now, but I wonder if it wears you." It was not cruel, it was piercing. A son staring into the soul of a father who had spent a lifetime trying to balance affection with image. But the words that shook Charles to his core were the most personal. William admitted his fear, not of duty, not of the throne, but of himself, of becoming like his father, emotionally distant, driven by image, forever guarded. He confessed that every time he saw George growing older, he saw shadows of his own childhood, and he would not allow history to repeat itself. Charles's reaction was immediate, visceral. Tears he had long buried beneath layers of stoicism began to fall. Rage flickered, but quickly turned inward, self-directed. He wanted to defend himself, to deny, to call it unfair, but he couldn't, because somewhere deep inside, he knew it was true. He rose from his chair and sat back down again. The words blurred as his vision clouded. Every instinct told him to retreat into silence, to let the palace handle this, to put on the mask again. But something in the letter refused to let go. Something in William's honesty demanded an answer. But William's letter wasn't just about the past. It was a warning for what was coming next, and Charles knew it. Behind every word William wrote was someone else, Diana. Her memory hovered like a ghost over the letter, reviving old wounds Charles thought time had healed. But memory does not age, and Diana's voice, though long silent, was suddenly louder than ever. As Charles read on, a familiar chill gripped him, not because of what William said directly, but because of what he didn't need to say. There, between the lines, was Diana's grief, her voice, her fears, her heartbreak. The emotional tremors that once shook the palace walls had returned, not through scandal or press headlines this time, but through the hand of her son. Charles saw it immediately. The way William described his confusion as a child, the constant tension between love and duty, and the feeling of being watched but not seen. These weren't just the reflections of a wounded son, they were echoes of Diana's own words, her own pleas, her own despair. It wasn't just William confronting his father, it was Diana confronting her past through him. The deeper Charles went into the letter, the more unbearable the weight became. Words like absence, silence, and loss kept recurring, wrapping around Charles like a noose of memory. And then came the detail that made him freeze. William had listened to her tapes again, the ones she recorded when no one else was listening, the ones filled with raw truth, bitterness, fear, and predictions. In those tapes, Diana had warned of a future where emotional walls would suffocate the very sons she tried to protect, a future where Charles, consumed by image, might lose not just their love, but their trust. And now, as he read William's words, Charles realized she had been right. He whispered it aloud, as if speaking it could somehow lessen its sting. "She warned me." The sentence barely escaped his lips. A crack, not in voice, but in armor. All those years he had tried to rationalize what happened, tried to convince himself that time would mend what was broken, that if he led with tradition, with protocol, with stoic endurance, the past would eventually fold itself into history. But it hadn't. It had lived on in William, in Harry, in the silence that sat like a weight between them all. The guilt Charles had long buried now surfaced, merciless and unfiltered. Not just guilt for how things ended with Diana, but for everything he didn't say, everything he didn't fix, everything he allowed to fester under the royal rug. And worse, for the growing realization that perhaps William had been right to revisit the past, because the past had never truly left, even in death. Diana had not released her grip on the family. Her presence remained, not as a haunting specter of scandal, but as a moral compass now inherited by her son. And for Charles, that was the cruelest irony of all. He had spent years building a legacy, and yet, in a single letter, it was Diana's voice, through William, that felt more lasting, more powerful, and more unshakable than anything he had constructed. And just when Charles thought the storm had peaked, the letter veered into a subject that would send shockwaves through the monarchy itself. William's letter did more than confront a father, it questioned a king. Behind the velvet curtains in state dinners, the future monarch was preparing for a new era, and in that vision, Charles's reign had become a symbol of stagnation. It began as a personal reckoning, but halfway through, the tone shifted. William's words grew sharper, bolder, less concerned with sentiment, and more focused on consequence. This was no longer just about their fractured bond, it was about the institution itself. Post-Elizabeth, William wrote, the monarchy had lost its rhythm. It had clung to legacy without grasping evolution. The world was moving, but the crown, he warned, was standing still. He spoke of perception, of how tradition had turned into theater, how authenticity was being swallowed by performance. There was a growing disconnect between the monarchy's carefully preserved image and the public's increasingly skeptical gaze. William didn't accuse Charles directly. He didn't have to. The implication was brutal in its elegance. This was a reign out of touch, holding on to structures that no longer served the people. Then came the line, the one Charles would replay in his mind again and again. If I must inherit a crown, let it not be one dripping in denial. It was more than poetry, it was a dagger. A son expressing horror at the thought of taking on a broken system and pretending it was whole. He wasn't asking for a different role, he was demanding a different crown, one that served purpose, not just protocol. Beneath the criticism lay a choice, not stated outright but clear in subtext: abdicate or evolve. Reform wasn't optional, it was urgent. William laid out in careful but commanding prose a vision for the monarchy's survival, and none of it resembled the world Charles had fought to preserve. He called for transparency in financial matters, for open accountability in appointments and decision-making, for a redefined relationship with the press, one based on dialogue, not manipulation. He urged the crown to embrace relevance, not through PR strategies, but by becoming the moral compass it once claimed to be. William argued that ceremonial gestures no longer carried weight without substance, that pageantry without principle would only hasten the monarchy's demise. What startled Charles wasn't just the content, it was the calm certainty behind it. William wasn't wondering if the monarchy needed change, he was warning what would happen if it didn't. And as painful as it was to admit, Charles could sense the winds shifting. He had heard whispers among the courtiers, he had read headlines that cut too close. Even within the inner circle, support for maintaining the status quo was beginning to fray. This was not a rebellion, it was a revelation. The man set to inherit the throne was not content to be its prisoner. He was challenging its very structure, not with threats, but with conviction. For Charles, the letter was a blow, not just to pride, but to purpose. His life had been built on the idea that legacy mattered above all, that he was the steward of continuity, the keeper of royal essence. Now that essence was being called into question, not by critics or outsiders, but by the one person whose approval he had always sought. As the foundations of tradition shook, Charles clutched the letter tighter, but the final section would deliver the deepest blow of all. What came next wasn't a request, it was a line drawn in the sand. William had made a decision, one that could fracture the monarchy beyond repair, and with every word, Charles's nightmare unfolded on the page. The tone changed instantly, no longer reflective, no longer cautious. This was resolve, controlled, deliberate, unmistakable. William wrote that there were limits even duty could not cross, that loyalty to institution must never outweigh loyalty to conscience, and that he had reached the edge of what he was willing to endure in silence. He spoke of walking away, not dramatically, not impulsively, calmly, permanently. If reform remained an illusion, if acknowledgement never came, if change was delayed again behind ceremony and comfort, then he would step back from royal life entirely, not as protest, as protection. Protection for Catherine, protection for the children. William wrote of nights spent watching his family sleep, wondering what kind of legacy he was quietly inviting into their future. He refused to let his son inherit confusion disguised as tradition. He refused to let his daughter grow up believing silence was strength. He had seen what unresolved pain did to generations. He would not offer his children the same inheritance. Then came the sentence that shattered what remained of Charles's composure. "You are my father, but you are not above truth." It was not said in anger, that was the cruelty of it. It was said with clarity, final, a boundary drawn not by rebellion, but by self-respect. William did not deny his love, he did not question his lineage, but he made one thing unmistakable: blood would not excuse denial, title would not excuse avoidance, and affection would not excuse failure. He demanded acknowledgement, not apologies crafted by advisors, not private tears behind palace doors, acknowledgement of mistakes, of distance, of the cost those choices had inflicted on others. He wanted more than emotion, he wanted responsibility. With every line, Charles began to understand the true scale of what he was facing. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was not a letter meant to heal quietly. This was a declaration that could reshape succession itself. If William withdrew, the monarchy would not simply lose an heir, it would lose credibility, continuity, and stability in a single blow. Panic surged. Not loud, not frantic, the dangerous kind. Internal, calculating, relentless. Charles imagined the headlines before they existed, the whispers in the corridors, the sudden concern across the Commonwealth, questions about legitimacy, about leadership, about whether the future king had already rejected the throne he was destined to wear. He imagined the press tearing the family apart, courtiers choosing sides, allies retreating, enemies advancing. One letter, one decision capable of igniting the greatest constitutional crisis of his reign. And yet beneath the fear, something else stirred. A recognition that William had not written this to destroy the monarchy, but to save it. Even now, even here, the son was trying to protect what the father had spent a lifetime guarding. Charles lowered the page slowly, hands no longer steady, his breath shallow, his mind racing toward consequences he could barely comprehend. But even as Charles staggered under the weight of William's letter, another voice entered the room, and with it, a new dimension to the unfolding crisis. She found him slumped in his chair, the letter clutched like a dagger. Queen Camilla had always known this day might come, but nothing prepared her for Charles's tears or for what she read when she picked up the page. He didn't speak when she entered. He didn't have to. The silence in the room was louder than any outburst, and when her eyes caught the trembling letter in his hands, Camilla knew this wasn't some diplomatic affair or family squabble. This was personal, devastatingly personal. Without asking, she took the pages and began to read. At first, her instinct was to protect him, to shield the man she loved from words that cut too deep. But the further she read, the more the sharpness turned inward. She expected criticism, she expected emotion. What she didn't expect was truth, raw, unvarnished, and inescapable. The letter didn't spare her. William hadn't named her directly, but the undertones were clear. The unspoken tensions, the whispered influence, the years of divided loyalties. Camilla felt every line like a slow unpeeling of the image they had so carefully constructed. And for the first time in years, she questioned whether that image had come at too high a cost. She turned to Charles, her voice quiet but firm. "He's not wrong, you know." The words lingered in the air, unwelcome and irreversible. Charles's head lifted slowly, his eyes bloodshot, not from fury, but from fear. Fear that he was losing more than just control, that he was losing the one person who once stood by him, no matter the storm. What followed was not just a conversation, it was a collision. Years of suppressed frustration finally erupted. Camilla questioned why Charles hadn't seen this coming, why he hadn't reached out sooner, why he had let the distance between father and son grow into a chasm. And Charles, still reeling, lashed out in confusion. Accusations, blame, denial, it all spilled out like water breaching a dam. But underneath the pain was something more dangerous, truth. Camilla wasn't arguing to win, she was pleading with Charles to do what no title had ever taught him, to act not as a sovereign, but as a father. She urged him to respond, to break the silence, to choose love over pride. The room turned quiet again, but the silence was no longer peaceful. It pulsed with tension, two people staring into the wreckage of everything they had tried to protect. And somewhere in that heavy stillness, the crown began to feel less like a symbol and more like a weight neither of them knew how to carry anymore. But while Camilla urged response, someone else had already taken action, and the palace was about to be blindsided by what came next. It was supposed to be private. It was supposed to stay behind royal walls, but within hours, excerpts of William's letter were in the hands of the press, and the monarchy was thrown into chaos. The leak hit like a thunderclap. No one saw it coming, not even those closest to the crown. What had begun as a deeply personal exchange between father and son was now front-page material, dissected by commentators, weaponized by tabloids, and devoured by a public starved for truth. It wasn't speculation, it wasn't rumor, it was real, and it was everywhere. William to Charles, reform or I walk. That headline blazed across the morning papers, igniting a media firestorm. The message was clear and unfiltered. The heir to the throne had issued an ultimatum, and the palace was caught flat-footed. Inside royal offices, aides scrambled. There was no damage control playbook for this. Every hallway echoed with frantic whispers and hurried footsteps. How had it gotten out? Who had leaked it? Fingers pointed in every direction. Some blamed a rogue staffer, others whispered of internal sabotage. The betrayal was internal, that much was certain, but no one could agree on who had lit the match. The public's response was immediate and divided. Many hailed William's courage, seeing his stand not as rebellion, but as necessary evolution. For them, he had spoken a truth long silenced. He wasn't tearing the monarchy down, he was trying to save it from itself. But others were gripped by unease. If the future king was ready to walk away, what did that mean for the monarchy's stability, for the Commonwealth, for the crown itself? Buckingham Palace responded with predictable restraint, a short, vague statement filled with formal language and emotional emptiness. His Majesty is addressing this matter privately and remains committed to the unity of the royal family. But it was too late. The silence said more than the words. Inside, Charles felt the humiliation deeply. Standing silently to the side, Catherine, Princess of Wales, gave her quiet endorsement. Her presence alone spoke volumes, calm, poised, and unwavering. She didn't need to say a word. Her support was not ceremonial, it was personal. The couple had made this decision together. They were united, not just in marriage, but in mission. William's speech wasn't a monologue, it was a manifesto, a call to reimagine what the crown could be. Transparent, accountable, compassionate. He called for unity, but made it clear. Unity could not come at the cost of silence. The monarchy could no longer demand obedience without offering honesty. And the public listened, not with skepticism, but with something rare, belief. A wave of support surged almost instantly. Social media exploded with praise. Polls shifted. Op-eds changed tone. Even those who had grown cynical toward royalty found something in William's words that felt different, real, necessary. By the time he stepped away from the microphones, the landscape had changed. This was no longer about a leaked letter. This was a movement, a reckoning, and William wasn't walking away from the monarchy. He was trying to walk it into the future. As William's voice echoed across the globe, the question became unavoidable. How would King Charles respond? Or would he respond at all? Alone once again, Charles sat at his desk, the letter now wrinkled, stained with tears. All his life he had waited to be king, and now, in the silence of power, he had to face the truth. Had he already lost his son and the future? The room was quiet, but his mind was not. Every corner of his memory now echoed with fragments he could no longer silence. William, as a boy, running through palace halls, looking up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. The laughter they shared on rare private retreats, the solemn gaze the night Diana was taken from them. He remembered it all now, and yet it felt like a life lived by someone else, someone with more time, more chances. He had always believed he was doing his best, that by protecting the institution, he was also protecting the family. But now, sitting in that chair with his son's words etched into his soul, he saw it clearly. There had been a cost, and it had come due. The pages had said it plainly, but it wasn't the ink that struck him, it was the honesty. William had bled truth into those lines, and Charles hadn't seen it coming. Or perhaps he had, and simply looked away. That was the real betrayal. Not between father and son, but between the man and his reflection. He whispered into the quiet, not expecting anyone to hear. "What have I done?" It wasn't theatrical, it was real, raw. A man brought to his knees not by scandal or politics, but by the unbearable weight of emotional reckoning. He saw now the moments he had missed, the long silences between them disguised as royal discipline, the carefully worded advice that had replaced heartfelt connection, the public unity that masked private disconnection. He had worn the crown, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped wearing the title that mattered more, father. For the first time in his reign, Charles felt the throne shaking beneath him, not from rebellion, not from crisis, but from his own heart. He had spent decades preparing to be king, but no briefing had prepared him for this moment, the realization that he might have broken something that could not be fixed with titles or ceremonies. Still, there was one thing left, a final act not born from power, but from humility. He reached for a fresh sheet of paper, hands trembling, eyes still wet. He didn't know where to begin. How do you answer a letter that had already rewritten the monarchy? How do you speak as a father when you've spent years speaking as a sovereign? And yet he began, slowly, hesitantly, the words forming not with authority but with remorse. "My son," he wrote, "you were right." He paused, pen hovering above the page, the weight of everything unspoken pressing down on his chest. This wasn't a royal response, it was a reckoning, one long overdue. And so, behind palace walls, where secrets have always reigned, a different kind of legacy was born, not through power, but through pain, and a single letter that dared to tell the truth. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.